All right.
Comment if we don't.
Okay. We think we have sound again. I hope you heard my welcome because we were so glad to have you. And we forgot to clap for you. Okay. All right. We're just now getting started in chapter 26 of Numbers. So if you'll go ahead and turn there with me. We've talked about in the first census, it was pretty much just for military organization purposes. And this took place at the foot of Sinai Mountain. And now they're at the doorway of the Promised Land once again. But this time in the second census, it was kind of twofold. Of course, they needed for the military organization, but for the second one, they were almost there. And so they needed to know how to proportion out the land once they got over into the Promised Land. And ladies, I just have to say that in the first census, there were 603,500 men ready for war, virtually the same amount 38 years later. And this is really not the norm. You would expect some growth, right? And this is what in the generations of unbelief in the wilderness cost them. In normal circumstances, this should have been much, much greater. But in the second census, 38 years later, they actually lost almost 2,000. And the stagnation of this population is probably reflective of Israel's spiritual state during those 38 years. They just, for all those years of no growth, no advance, just going in circles and circles and circles. So until a generation that was bold enough and had enough faith to actually go in and take the Promised Land. So God was blessing or cursing particular tribes, no doubt related to their abiding with Him. So we're going to look at, I know there were 12 tribes. Remember Jacob. These were named after his sons. And we're just going to talk about 3 or 4 of them today because of time. But just some things that kind of jumped out and I thought was interesting to me. So let's talk about Reuben's clan. Reuben was Jacob's oldest son. And normally the way that worked back then, the hierarchy, the first son would have been chosen to be the leader of the Israelites, but that wasn't the case. Jacob, Moses, who was actually descended from Levi's tribe, a younger son, was chosen to be the leader. So this caused some jealousy within Reuben's tribe. And if you remember, this is the tribe that Korah's gang. Remember the rebel rousers when the ground opened up and swallowed them up? Korah's gang came from this tribe. Moving on down, let's talk about Simeon's descendants. Okay, from the census, this went from 24, they went down from 59,300 down to 22,200 in the second census. And from the things that I've read and researched, the explanation is probably, remember the 24,000 people that died in the plague? That they came from the Simeon's clan. Because remember what happened when they were close to they got all this partying and carrying on with the Moabites? And Baal, who was a local deity who was worshipped by Moab, remember, like Debbie said last week, I think it was so funny that they started fraternizing with all those daughters of Moab who were so ready and willing. So this was, and there was a guy named Zimri, and he was a prince within this clan, the Simeon clan, and he was really the ringleader, one of the ringleaders of this iniquity, and all this infidelity started happening. So as a result, the Simeon descendants, they lost a whole bunch to almost non-existent. Another tribe I wanted to talk about was Joseph's descendants. And we're talking about Manasseh and Ephraim. In the first tribe, Manasseh's tribe in the first one was one of the smallest tribes in the first census. In the second census, it was one of the larger tribes. And just on the flip side, his brother Ephraim started out numerous and he went way down. From what I researched, the reason being probably for this is and we'll see this, you can go back to, let's see, in Exodus. Oh, it tells about when Jacob was on his deathbed, and he called his sons to him, and he called Joseph to him, and he said, Joseph, he said, the 2 sons that you bore when you lived in Egypt will be mine. I want to adopt them, and they're going to be treated just like my other sons with the same perks, the same everything. But Jacob was very old and sick and he couldn't see very well. Whatever the reason was, he passed his hand over Ephraim first. And Ephraim and Manasseh was the firstborn, if you remember that. And so Ephraim was the one to be really, really blessed. Well, the reason that some commentaries think that the reason there was such a remarkable decline in Ephraim's tribe and such a gain in Manasseh was, and this was all in Genesis 48:17 through 20. And the reason being is the Lord saw this. He saw that the Ephraimites, for some reason, they got real haughty and really uppity, like, we're the ones that Jacob, we were blessed, all this kind of stuff. So they were really cruel and did some, caused a lot of trouble for the Manassites. Is that how you say it? Manassites? Not mosquito bites like Debbie says to us. Okay, so we do know that the Lord he saw this, and so he multiplied the Manasseh clan. And it is his glory to help the weakest, to raise up those who are cast down. And over on 59, flipped over to 26:59, I just wanted to share this one little factoid with you that I thought was kind of interesting. This is from the Levite clan. And that was the priesthood, and they were not counted in the census, and they were not given land or anything like that. They certainly were not left out. On 59 it says, the name of Amram's wife was Jochebed, a descendant of Levi, born to Levi in Egypt. She bore to Amram Aaron, Moses, and their sister Miriam, that we've talked about in the past. So I thought that was worth mentioning. Okay, so thus, ladies, God's justice and holiness was strikingly displayed in the sweeping judgments that reduced the ranks of some tribes and in the extraordinary increases of others. I'm not going to read it to you, but verses 52 through 56, the portion of each tribe, and we're talking about the proportion of the land. They were right there. They were about to go in, and so all this needed to be taken care of before they actually got there. The proportion of each tribe was to be greater or less according to their population. The lot was cast, we talked about that a little bit, for determining the section of the country in which tribes should be located. The lot decided the particular tribe, whether they're just going to settle in the north, the south, the east, or the west. Now then, we are going to read, look with me on verses 63 through 65. These were the ones registered by Moses and the priest Eleazar when they registered the Israelites in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from the Jericho. I just have to say, I shared with the ladies earlier that my husband and I were blessed to get to go to the Holy Land a few years ago, and we got rebaptized in the Jordan River. I bet some of you have. Highlighted the trip for me. But among them, there was not one of those who had been registered by Moses and the priest Aaron when they registered the Israelites in the wilderness of Sinai. For the Lord had said to them that they would all die in the wilderness. None of them was left except Caleb and Joshua. All right, now this is my favorite part. Okay, let's first read the takeaway before we move on to chapter 27. I apologize, it was so big. I thought I had it squished down for a half page, so you may have to fold it when you put it in with your others. The Bible fact was only a small population of the second census, only a small population difference after 38 years. God preserved his people and his promises. But the takeaway for us ladies, God always keeps his promises, even if the way in which he keeps them doesn't look like what we had in mind, right? It's going to be in his time, not our time, his way, not our way, and it always works out for the best. Now then, let's move over to, where am I? Right here. I wanted to share, we're going to talk about verse 1 and 27. Let me read just verse 1. The case of daughters' inheritance. The daughters of Zelophehad had approached. Zelophehad was the son of Hephar, blah, 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 from the clans of Manasseh, the son of Joseph. These were the names of his daughters, Mahlah, Noah, Hoglag, Milcah, and Tirzah. They stood before Moses, the priest Eleazar, the leaders in the entire community at the entrance to the tent of meeting. And we'll come back to that in a minute. Such lovely names, aren't they? It's surprising that they're not popular choices today. Like so many ladies named their little baby, sweet little baby girls, these beautiful biblical names like Rebecca and Mary and Deborah and Rachel. Does anyone out there have a daughter or granddaughter named Hoglag? No one? Go figure, go figure. Okay, I did bring the book today. Last time we talked about, when we paid homage to Miriam. And like I told you, I really think that Miriam was the Debbie Stuart to the Israelite women. And he placed her there for a reason. Well, of course, these 5 daughters were in this book. And so I'm going to be sharing a little bit from this too, if you don't mind. This chapter is dedicated to these girls. These girls were without a guardian. They were, when they approached Moses and the elders, they probably were adults at this point in time. They seemingly were unmarried, and so they were kind of on their own. And a little fact from this book was that they were the descendants, these 5 girls were the descendants of Rachel through her son Joseph, and 6 generations before. So they came from good stock, didn't they? And they were from the tribe of Manasseh. And this is the only time in the Bible, this one episode, when these gals are mentioned, and even their father. So this is of real significance. If you'll go back to, let's see. All right, these girls, just a minute, we'll read some more from chapter 27. These sisters had come to the entrance of the tabernacle tent of meeting, and that's where everyone came if they had domestic or civic disputes. That's where they would come to gripe about their stuff. Okay, and they let Moses know right off the bat a couple of things. If you'll look with me on verse 3 and 27, our father died in the wilderness, but he was not among Korah's gang who gathered together against the Lord. Instead, he died because of his own sin, and he had no sons. Why should the name of our father be taken away from the clan? Since he had no sons, give us property among our father's brothers. So we see that they were very well planned, and they wanted to know, they let him know right quick. I mean, what they really believed in, was it the 5th commandment, honor thy father and mother? They let Moses and the elders know right quick. He was not like Korah's gang, and he died from his own sin. And the best I could figure out that, because no place did it say what that common sin, what that sin was. So it just, maybe the common law of mortality, through sin was enough to be said about that. But you can pretty much bet that he was Zelophehad was a man of means, and he probably had some greedy brothers that just couldn't wait to get their hands on his property. I'm just taking a little liberty there. But that was the norm. That's what normally happened. Well, these girls, these 5 sisters, they prepared their argument well. And they made it clear that, look, this is not just for material interest alone. We are here. Why should our father's name disappear from our clan just because he has no son? And back then, carrying on a name in that culture was far more important than even inheriting wealth. So that really was their main purpose there. So Moses prays, and God answers their prayer, and their request is granted. And I just wanted to read, here's the book that some of you are interested in, and the name and everything. The author, Ruth Tucker. I wanted to directly from her book read this. This precedent-setting legal case establishes property rights never before enjoyed by women. Now, under the law of Moses, daughters' property rights would come before those of their uncles when their father died. This is one of the most liberating accounts of women in all of ancient history and literature. Rare is the ordinary woman who can change the course of history. It started way back then with these daughters of Zelophehad. Okay, let's see, where are we? All right, let's move down into chapter 27. Y'all be sure to keep you the time. Y'all know I like to talk. They're going to tell me when to stop. Joshua commissioned to succeed Moses. Let's look at 12 through 14 as I read this to you. Then the Lord said to Moses, go up this mountain of the Amorim range and see the land that I have given the Israelites. After you have seen it, you will also be gathered to your people, as Aaron your brother was. When the community quarreled in the wilderness of Zin, both of you rebelled against my command to demonstrate my holiness in their sight at the waters. Those were the waters of Meribah, Kadesh, in the wilderness of Zin. Remember, they whacked it real hard with the staff as they're talking to it? So Moses appealed to the Lord. May the Lord, the God who gives the breath to all, appoint a man over the community who will go out before them and come back in before them, and who will bring them out and bring them in, so that the Lord's community won't be like sheep without a shepherd. After hearing of this coming fate, Moses doesn't try to talk God out of it. He doesn't complain. His only concern is for what? What was his only concern? For his people, for his children, for his congregation, not for himself at all. And in verses 15 through 18, I'm not going to read that, but Joshua was mostly known as just a servant. He was an assistant to Moses back in Exodus 24:13. But that time prepared him, that servanthood prepared him to take over the leadership that he was called to do. We know, ladies, that Moses must die, but death doesn't cut him off. It only, like he said, he's going to be gathered to his people. He's going to be brought to rest with the holy patriarchs that had gone before him, Abraham, Jacob, Isaac, and even his brother Aaron. So that was his people of choice. That's who he loved. That's who he's going to be gathered to. As we talked before, we remember the Transfiguration, that he came down with Elijah. So we know that he is enjoying the time up there with his buddies, just like we are with our girlfriends. Okay. Now, God directs Moses to secure the succession of Joshua. Joshua has the spirit of wisdom on him. Remember, Moses laid his hands on him. You can read about that over in Deuteronomy 34:9. I did want to make this observation, though. Moses had his own sons. But he cheerfully ordained Joshua. This was really not the norm back then, where sons, especially first sons, were relegated to replace the people in leadership, especially in the hierarchy. But Moses and his wife Zipporah had two sons, Gershom and Eliezer, not to be confused with the high priest. This was Eliezer. And they even had a grandson. I'm probably pronouncing these wrong, but I did teach phonetics, but I'm not sure if I'm saying these right. Shabuel was born to his son Gershom. But remember, Moses first ordained Eleazar as the high priest. And then he ordained Joshua to take his place. And Joshua wasn't even from their tribe. He was from a different tribe. He wasn't even from the Levite tribe as the chief ruler. So this shows that his own children were left in the rank of just common Levites, as he was commissioned to follow God's plan, that he was so an instance of total self-denial and submission to the will of God. Really a very meek leader. Okay, moving on very quickly to 28. Let's read verses 1 through 3, prescribed offerings. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Command the Israelites and say to them, be sure to present to me at its appointed time my offering and my food as my fire offerings and a pleasing aroma to me. And say to them, this is the fire offering you are to present to the Lord." The fire offerings that were presented to the Lord on various holy days in the Israelite calendar, God would bless the faithful with abundance. So this was to thank Him for their appreciation, and that He would continue to provide for them in their fields and in their flocks when they got over to the Promised Land. So this was a time to really celebrate God's greatness and goodness in rendering the fruits of their labors. Okay, looking at with me on 28, let's move all the way over to, no, I'm not going to read that. I'm just going to read what I've written about it. Every day was holy, and to be dedicated to the Lord, at the entrance of the tabernacle, there had to be a burnt offering. Every morning and every evening, there was this burnt offering, and the priest would recite special blessings. There was animal sacrifices, and I'm not going to read all of these, animal sacrifices that were accompanied by the appropriate proportions of grain, oil, and drink offerings. The burnt offering was established back in the very beginning when they were at Mount Sinai, because it was a pleasing aroma to the Lord. That just kind of really makes me think of how important aromas are to us. Like, it's almost Thanksgiving and it's almost Christmas. Don't you just think about what? The smell of cinnamon and things baking like that, and the potpourri that you might cook on your stove for all these. So, but the Lord was no different. And that's why he came down to be with his people. He loved the pleasing aroma of these burnt offerings in appreciation to him. The daily burnt offering of lamb, grain, and drink was actually doubled on the Sabbath. They had to do twice as much, so that was a lot. For that many thousands of people, that was a lot of sacrifices. According to Exodus 12 and 8, the fundamental Passover foods were lamb, unleavened bread, and bitter herbs. These were to help the people remember the events that brought them out of the redemption of Israel from Egypt. Remember the Passover, the blood around the door frames. So one more little thing I'm going to say before we hop over to 28. We continue with 28. The first day of the Festival of Weeks was called the Day of First Fruits. It was considered a Sabbath, and they would take sheaves of new barley and wheat and they would wave them around everywhere to celebrate the Lord's gift of the harvest. And before we look at me with the takeaway for chapter 28. Did I read 27? The takeaway for 27? I didn't. Okay, let's go back to that. That's important. The case of the daughter's inheritance, the biblical fact was Zelophehad's 5 daughters had strong faith in the power and promise of God on yet unconquered land. They didn't even have the land yet, but these girls had so much faith that it was going to happen, that the Lord was going to fulfill his promise. They petitioned for their deceased father's portion. This was in keeping with the 5th commandment, honor your father and mother, in Exodus 20:12. The takeaway, though, give thanks for our heavenly inheritance by the covenant of grace. Whether you're male or female, this is in Galatians 3 and 28, male or female, since we are all one in Christ Jesus. And for 28, the prescribed offerings, the biblical fact, every feast of Israel was to carry with it the idea of atonement, in which a person's sins were covered. The takeaway, the beautiful takeaway, ladies, our own lives should be lived in constant awareness of the atonement of Jesus Christ, made for us and thus to be filled with thanksgiving to him. Okay, let's move on. Oh, I think I'm going to get through today. Okay, on to chapter 29, the Festival of Trumpets and Offerings. Let's read 29:1. You are to hold a sacred assembly in the 7th month on the 1st day of the month, and you are not to do any daily work. This will be a day of trumpet blasts for you. Offer a burnt offering as a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And I have to say, like I mentioned before, when we went to Israel, as some of you have, boy, they take the Sabbath seriously. We stayed in kibbutz, 2 or 3 different kibbutz, and they didn't even, it was deserted except for the tourists. They didn't even believe in pushing the button of the elevator. I thought, okay, they can climb stairs, 2 flights down the stairs. Doesn't that exert more energy than pushing a button? But anyway, I didn't write the rules. But they really take the Sabbath seriously, as we should. We shouldn't have to cook. We shouldn't have to wash dishes. Anything on Sundays, right? All right, on 29, the beginning of the agricultural year was the holiest day of the year. And this was the Day of Atonement. And the festival of Booths occurred. And this month was called Tishr. Is that how you say it, Tishr? Okay, some of you that know more about the Jewish faith than I do. Verse 1 through 6 tells us in 29, the collective offering presented on the day of joyful shouting of Tishr was called the Day of Blowing Trumpets. Now, I wanted to make a distinction there that this particular blowing of trumpets were not the silver trumpets we've talked about before, when they would go out and blow the trumpet for how many were supposed to come to the tabernacle and what for and blah, blah, blah. This particular time in Tishr, these were to be the ram's horn. And I believe in Hebrew that's called the shofar. It was sounded rather than the silver trumpets. When we read about that in Numbers 10. The sounding of the ram's horn was called to repentance. That's the important fact right there. The designation of this day is Rosh Rosh Hashanah, which is the head of the year. 7 through 11, the holiest day of the year, required a sacred assembly of self-denial. And when this was going on, they did a lot of fasting, and they were restricted from anything that brought comfort or pleasure. They were very, very serious about this. I've still got a little time. Good. The work of Christ on the cross, and this is the beautiful connection of the New Testament. If the work of Christ on the cross brought fulfillment to the ritual of the Day of Atonement, Christ offered himself as a once-for-all eternal sacrifice. In Hebrews 9:11-28, his work accomplished from sin. His work accomplished redemption from sin and cleansed us of our guilty consciences. Isn't that beautiful? Verses 12 through 38, the Festival of Booths. This is kind of a cute. You know, I got on the elevator one day coming up here a couple of times ago. I don't think she's in here. And a lady told me that she just came from erecting one of these. Was it one of you ladies? One of these booths, this Festival of Booths. That she still does that, even though she's a Baptist. She still does that. She makes a booth. Like I said, the 1st and 8th days were considered Sabbaths for sacred assembly. The sukkah was like a hut or a tent, and of course, this was just to demonstrate God's provision for the Israelites for those 38 years that they had wandered and wandered and wandered in circles and circles and circles around in the wilderness. The association of booths in the Exodus from Egypt provided the continuation of salvation, redemption, and preservation of the Passover. And finally, in verse 39, let's look at that right quick. Verse 39 says, "Offer these to the Lord in your appointed times, in addition to your vow and freewill offerings, whether burnt, grain, drink, or fellowship offerings." So Moses faithfully, as he did everything, accomplished the task assigned to him by God, as he instructed the Israelite priest on the proper procedure of commemorating and celebrating God's goodness in the holy days of the calendar. And ladies, I'd just like to say, kind of just as a food for thought. In closing, ladies, let's just, as mothers and grandmothers and sisters and aunts and just as women in general, let's just kind of dedicate ourselves to establishing and maintaining, to the best of our ability, the advancement of God's kingdom before we are gathered to our people. Thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed it. Hope to see you next week when Debbie will be back, I promise. And thank you, Debbie. I have to just say that Debbie was so precious to let me do this. She knew that I had been praying for clarity on my purpose after I retired from teaching, of where I can best serve God in his kingdom, whether it's to stick with little people or to graduate up to big people. So we'll see. Y'all pray for me. Thank you.